Tonight, a call to action. Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi calls on the people of Myanmar to join her fight for democracy and says she does not fear the consequences. I'm Russ Mitchell. Also tonight, freed by pirates. Modern-day buccaneers in Somalia released the retired British couple they've held for more than a year. A for effort. One large failing high school turned itself around through the power of the written word.
Who I became is like, wow, I'm really proud of myself.
And fighting fish. Meet the anglers who take on the toughest, meanest fish on the river.
This is the CBS Evening News with Russ Mitchell.
And good evening. One day after being freed from house arrest, human rights activist Aung San Suu Kyi is throwing down the gauntlet to the military rulers of Myanmar. She told followers she's carrying on her fight for democracy, likely setting the stage for another confrontation. Celia Hatton has the latest.
Myanmar's opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi spoke to a huge crowd of supporters today. Hours after being freed from 7 years of house arrest, she called for democratic rights in her military-ruled country, once known as Burma. If we are to walk the democratic path, we have to walk together, build together, pave together, she told 5,000 supporters. Suu Kyi spent 15 of the last 21 years in detention and near isolation, but she's never been forgotten. I'm so happy the hair on my skin is standing up, says this follower. Burmese people call her mother, auntie, or quite simply, the conscience of Myanmar, a country where the military has held power for decades while the majority subsists in deep poverty. Aung San Suu Kyi's father, General Aung San, fought for Burma's independence from colonial rule in the 1940s. Decades later, Suu Kyi left her husband and sons in England to form a pro-democracy party in Myanmar, sparking the first of many detentions. Suu Kyi's party won a landslide election in 1990, but the regime refused to relinquish power. The junta won its own election a week ago, though it's widely believed that vote was rigged. It's unclear how Myanmar's rulers will react to Suu Kyi's calls for change. Suu Kyi was under house arrest when she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991, which was accepted by her family. When her husband, Michael Aris, was dying of cancer in England, she decided to stay in Myanmar, fearing the country's leaders would not let her return if she left. To carry the hope and expectations of the people is a burden, but I'm not afraid of the responsibility, she told the crowds today. Aung San Suu Kyi will likely need that freedom from fear in the days and weeks to come. Celia Hatton, CBS News, Beijing.
Now to Somalia, where there's some good news to tell you about tonight. A British couple held captive by pirates for 388 days has been freed. As Charlie Daggett tells us, the husband and wife will arrive home tomorrow. But tonight in Somalia, there are still questions and concerns.
Still on Somali soil, but out of the grasp of her captors, Rachel Chandler could only laugh when she was asked if she felt safe. On the flight to Kenya, the Chandlers said they were happy to be alive after being held by Somali pirates for more than a year. Paul Chandler said they were rather skinny and bony, but otherwise fine. The retired British couple were sailing in the Indian Ocean when they were seized by Somali pirates in October 2009. Their kidnappers initially threatened to kill them if their demand for the $7 million ransom was not met, and released videos to show they were serious.
I don't know what else I can say. Just please, please help us. Please.
Hands up! Despite international efforts to stop them, Somali pirates have been attacking ships in the seas off their coast for years. They usually target large cargo vessels, hijacking them and demanding millions in ransom to let crew and cargo free. Pirates are still holding close to 500 hostages in more than 20 ships. It's thought Somalis living abroad help pay some of the estimated $500,000 ransom money to secure the Chandlers' release. British officials would only insist the UK would never award hostage takers.
No British government is going to start paying ransoms for hostages.
The couple will spend the night at the British High Commission in Nairobi, and they're expected to fly back to the UK tomorrow. Now, the family says although they appear to be in good shape, it's hard to tell how this ordeal has affected them physically and emotionally. Ross?
Charlie Daggett in London, thank you very much. NATO forces in Afghanistan suffered their worst losses in a month today. 5 NATO service members were killed in attacks in the east and south. It is not known if any were American. And a dozen tanker trucks hauling fuel to NATO forces went up in flames during an insurgent attack. President Obama is back in Washington tonight after returning from his 10-day trip to Asia. During the flight, Mr. Obama praised Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for backing a U.S. proposal for a 90-day freeze on West Bank settlements. And, of course, Mr. Obama returns home to a politically divided Washington. And today, some new folks came to town. The congressional class of 2011. Wyatt Andrews has more.
Hey, Dina, Todd Rokita. Yeah, good to see you.
It's the largest freshman class elected to the House in more than 60 years. Almost 1/4 of the House, at least 93 new members,
feels good and ready to get to work,
are streaming into Washington for orientation, collecting new laptops, Blackberries, and a crushing load of reading on how to set up their offices and even how to behave. This is just the ethics manual?
That's the ethics manual. So I guess Congress needs to learn a little more about ethics than most other folks do.
The 93 new members are mostly Republican. Only 9 are Democrats. The class includes a former star of the MTV show Real World. There's one former star from the NFL. There's a son of the former Vice President, Dan Quayle, and 8 newly elected doctors and nurses. But 32 new members, 1/3 of the class, either own or run a small business. And most of them, like Scott Tipton, a Tea Party-backed Republican from western Colorado, say their mission is to increase jobs, reduce taxes, and cut government.
We have to be able to get people employed, get the private sector working once again in this nation.
come to January, we can get right to work.
And almost all of the new members, Republican and Democrat, say they were elected because voters are angry at Washington. That includes Detroit Democrat Hanson Clark.
Number one mission, work directly for the taxpayers and citizens, not for all these lobbyists and groups and politicians in Washington.
That seems to be the common thread that a lot of folks are coming in the door with.
By that you mean don't become Washington?
Don't become Washington. Remember where you're at, where you came from, who sent you.
Meanwhile, the lame duck Congress returns to Washington this week to start negotiations over extending the Bush-era tax cut. But now they'll do it with all these new members of Congress in town for orientation, with most of them arguing to make the tax cuts permanent and apply to everyone. Russ?
A very good point, Wyatt. I wonder, with these folks in town, haven't been sworn in, nothing, can't vote, anything like that. But given what happened on Election Day, just how influential will they be during this lame duck session?
Russ, they'll be very influential. They already are. For example, lots of Democrats who used to say, let's raise taxes only on people above $250,000 a year, are now saying, let's make that $1 million. Let's only raise taxes on millionaires. So they don't have a vote, as you point out, but the fact that so many low-tax members got elected to the new Congress is pushing the debate in the current Congress.
Okay, Wyatt Andrews in Capitol Hill, thank you very much. Tomorrow marks the official halfway point of November, and those battling for your holiday shopping cash are facing an unexpected opponent this year, an opponent that already has a lot of consumers thinking twice. Bill Whitaker has more.
Just when retailers were hoping the coming holidays would get shoppers spending their dollars, rapidly rising prices might make them pinch their pennies instead.
The paycheck just doesn't go as far as it used to.
Gas costs 13 cents more per gallon than last year. A gallon of milk is up nearly 30 cents. In just the last month, coffee has gone up 24 cents a pound. And now cotton prices are at all-time highs, up 400% in the last 2 years. Last week's price was nearly double what it was in July. Last spring, bad weather in India, Pakistan, and China destroyed cotton fields, slashing the global supply. While demand is higher than ever, the growing middle class in those countries is spending its newfound wealth on Western-style cotton clothes. Rich Delano works in China, where investors are ignoring stocks and buying bales.
What they're doing is they're buying actually containers of cotton yarn and holding it and sitting on it.
Upping the prices, which are just now trickling down the supply chain.
The cotton costs more, so the pockets cost more, which means these all-cotton jeans are going to cost you more.
Higher prices are a tough sell in this economy, so manufacturers are cutting where they can, using synthetic blends, lowering labor costs, and searching for long-term alternatives, including from an unlikely source, bamboo, which looks like cotton, feels like cotton, and at this point is cheaper than cotton.
So she has all the kids' styles here.
Delano says inquiries for his bamboo fabric are up almost 50%.
More manufacturers and more brands, more designers are looking for alternative fibers and alternative fabrics.
Tough times can be fertile ground for new ideas. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, learn the secrets of one high school's successful turnaround. Education reformers often favor the creation of smaller schools, believing that schools with large enrollments are simply too big and too impersonal to do the job. Now, one innovative high school near Boston is challenging that view. Bianca Solorzano has the latest installments in our series, Reading, Writing, and Reform.
Have fun, have fun.
They call her Dr. Zach. Principal Susan Zakowitz is Brockton High School's #1 cheerleader.
Good job, good job.
And a driving force behind an academic turnaround the experts said could not be done because the school was just too big.
I believe people expect us to fail. A large urban high school, 4,200 kids are here right now. And they come from great poverty, but I want them to fight.
Brockton's battle began in 1998 when the state of Massachusetts introduced an exam that all high school students had to pass in order to graduate.
We had 44% failing English and 75% failing math. So the school was in trouble.
Desperate, Zakowitz came up with a plan. A small committee of teachers meeting on Saturday mornings engineered a back-to-basics curriculum they call the Literacy Initiative. At its core, reading, speaking, reasoning, and most importantly, writing.
Writing is thinking. Once they started the writing, they started learning the material better.
Writing doesn't stop at English class. The choir writes about a composer. The band writes about music. Even in gym class,
3 complete sentences.
pencils fly.
Every day, every class, no exceptions.
Full sentence questions.
Not everyone loved the idea.
I would say I was a doubting Thomas, but as you can see from our test scores, it's really made a difference.
Is the background?
Over 12 years, the improvement has been dramatic. In English, a 44% failure rate dropped to 5%. In math, a 77% failure rate dropped to 15%. The students were an even tougher crowd.
Honestly, I hated it. I thought it was tedious.
Basketball player Neffy Marsh rolled her eyes at first.
Even though it's just warm-ups, I feel the pressure already.
But now she says it has upped her game on all fronts.
Everything's clearer, actually. There are times from when I'm on the court to when I'm inside making my bed. It's crazy. Literacy objectives get to you. They creep up on you. It prepared me for the SATs. It prepared me for life in general and how to communicate.
Tatiana, initially described by her teachers as a total nightmare,
Othello used to be a servant.
is now college bound.
From what I was and then who I became is like, wow, I'm really proud of myself.
I think that what you see here are kids that think it's cool to be smart.
The method is supported by the Teachers Union and is being studied by Harvard University. The bottom line for Brockton students is a brighter future.
Students don't have a right to fail. We have an obligation to make sure they don't.
And that is something to cheer about. Bianca Solorzano, CBS News, Brockton, Massachusetts.
Police in Ohio today arrested a man on a kidnapping charge after finding a missing 13-year-old girl bound and gagged in his basement. Officials hope the man can lead them to the girl's mother and brother, along with a friend of the mother. The three have been missing since last week. Next up on tonight's CBS Evening News, a safe haven for former Nazis in the United States. The New York Times today posted on its website a never-released Justice Department report detailing the extent to which Nazi war criminals were allowed to enter the U.S. after World War II. It's a report the government has suppressed for years. According to the long secret report, after World War II, Nazis were allowed into the U.S. some for intelligence reasons, as the nation's focus shifted to the Cold War. The 600-page report, called Striving for Accountability in the Aftermath of the Holocaust, does not put a number on the Nazis admitted, but concludes that, quote, America, which prided itself on being a safe haven for the persecuted, became, in some small measure, a safe haven for persecutors as well.
It's repugnant that intelligence agencies would want to do business with people that were involved in the worst genocide in the history of mankind.
Responding to revelations about suspected Nazis in the U.S., in 1979, the Justice Department created the Office of Special Investigations to identify and deport Nazis. The government has since deported 67 and blocked the entry of 200 more. But often, the war criminals lived here for decades. Arthur Rudolph, who developed German missiles with slave labor at concentration camps, entered the U.S. in 1945 and was credited with helping NASA create the Saturn V rocket that took American astronauts to the moon. Rudolph wasn't deported to Germany until 1992. Andrea Artukovic, a Nazi collaborator from Croatia, known as the Butcher of the Balkans, lived here until the mid-1980s before he was eventually deported and died a convicted war criminal in Yugoslavia.
The strong burden ought to be on making it public. It's a long time ago, and we can learn from our mistakes.
The Justice Department told CBS News that the 4-year-old report was not made public because it was a draft which had omissions and errors. It appears the American dream of home ownership is being downsized in these hard times. A new survey shows the median home size has dropped from 2,300 square feet in 2007 to 2,100 today. And many Americans say their ideal size is even smaller, less than 2,000 square feet. Findings of the longest major study on stress in women are in this evening. The 10-year study found that women with demanding jobs were 40% more likely to have a heart attack or stroke as women with less stressful jobs. The study also found that women who lacked control over their work or were afraid of being fired were also at greater risk. And coming up on tonight's CBS Evening News, forget about the one that got away. These fish fight back. Finally, this Sunday, the Army Corps of Engineers said last week that the vicious Asian silver carp seems to have snuck by an electronic barrier on the Illinois River and may have reached Lake Michigan. While the Army may find the carp quite the opponent, John Blackstone says one civilian fisherman believes he's found the answer.
When outdoorsman Chris Brackett sets out on a fishing trip, he comes armed for combat.
Let's let the battle begin.
The river looks deceptively calm, but one by one, then two by two, the enemy makes himself known. Meet the Asian silver carp, scourge of the Illinois River. Imported to keep fish farms algae-free, the carp escaped during Midwest floods and now dominates many waterways. Vibrations from outdoor motors scare the carp, setting off their notorious and frenzied flight.
It's one of them deals to where a redneck says, watch this.
Like any good river rat, Chris Brackett saw an opportunity.
I hit the first fish and I knew immediately that it was going to be something cool. Extreme aerial bow fishing.
A sport was born.
Fish on! And pretty much when you draw...
What began as a goof among friends is now a thriving charter business.
Here's your weapon.
It's awesome. Awesome. The thrill of it.
Country music star Craig Morgan, who also hosts a hunting and fishing show on the Outdoor Channel,
Showtime,
saw Brackett's racket online, but he was unconvinced.
Everybody said this was pretty intense. I jump out of planes and ride dirt bikes for fun. I mean, and after all, it's just fish.
But what fish? You'd have to call this a target-rich environment. It's hard to say whether Morgan had more fun as the hunter
Fish on! Fish on!
Or the hunted. Shooting fish in a barrel? Maybe. But it does take patience and steady aim. Quick reflexes help too. But beware, Brackett says the silver carp is cross-breeding with its heftier cousin, the bighead carp. Next year could be the season of 50 to 60 pounders.
Killer fish, man. Killer fish. We're going to need bigger cages.
We're going to need a bigger cage.
We're going to need a bigger boat.
John Blackstone, CBS News, San Francisco.
That is wild. And that is the CBS Evening News. Later on CBS, 60 Minutes. Thanks for joining us this Sunday evening. I'm Russ Mitchell, CBS News in New York. Katie Couric will be here tomorrow. Good night.